The whole point of propaganda is to get people to do something they wouldn't normally do, to obscure the truth, or to make gains on a situation. This short series is going to look at World War II's Eastern Theater in three parts: pre, during, and post-war, primarily focusing on what was going on outside of the major battles with Germany and the Soviet Union. Germany has a flaw that goes back to the mid to late 1800s, roughly the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. They are food importers, and this is very important to understand as it drives many decisions. Throughout World War I, Germany had lost a little over 750,000 people from food shortages, as Germany didn't have enough farmland and Allied blockades and embargoes prevented food from German colonies to make it to Germany. World War I officially ended with the signing of the Treaty of Versailles on June 28, 1919. From the treaty, Germany had many conditions they were forced to agree to, but military restrictions, give up territory, and payments for war damages were the main parts. Some of these penalties were especially harsh on the German economy during the 1920s, which led to uprisings, assassinations, hyperinflation, and eventually economic collapse. Political fallout was also vast, with rapid changes in political party power as Germans felt betrayed by the treaty and embarrassed by the agreements. The economic hardship as a result made people desperate, and in their desperation, they were looking for a leader. This gave rise to Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. Hitler was proud of the German people and campaigned on the horrible treatment of the German people following World War I. Hitler also had two main scapegoats that he would mention in his rally speeches: the political leaders that allowed Germany to agree to such restrictions on the German people, and the Jews. The Jewish population had such a strong hold on the upper levels of German society through politics, banking, media, and various other businesses. The Nazi Party implemented policies and used, we'll say, aggressive tactics to try to get the Jews to move out of Germany on their own. As the saying goes, don't care where you go, but you got to get out of here, was essentially the approach the Nazis took. Nearly half of the Jews left Germany during the 1930s, which was about 250,000. Even though there was an aggressive treatment towards the Jews, many Western leaders supported Nazi Germany, as it was perceived they were on the front line of fighting a new rising ideology in communism. In the Soviet Union during the late 1910s, basically at the end of World War I, there was a civil war that took place called the Bolshevik Revolution. Bolshevik secret police on the night of July 16, 1918, murdered the Tsar Nicholas II, Russia's last emperor, his wife, and 5 children, all of whom had been held hostage for months. What was unknown until the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991 and documents were revealed was that Vladimir Lenin knew at the time what was happening, from kidnapping to execution. This is what U.S. Ambassador in Russia, David Francis, said in a January 1918 message to Washington. The Bolshevik leaders here, most of whom are Jews and 90% of whom are returned exiles, care little for Russia or any other country, but are internationalists, and they are trying to start a worldwide social revolution. Winston Churchill had this to say about Russia of this period: "There is no need to exaggerate the part played in the creation of Bolshevism and in the actual bringing about the Russian Revolution by these international and, for the most part, atheistical Jews." After this period of revolution, Lenin took over as leader of the Soviet Union, and then Stalin upon Lenin's death in 1924, although Stalin criminalized other political opponents. But make no mistake, even though Lenin and Stalin were not Jewish, a significant number of top commissars were Jewish. And in cases where the top position wasn't a Jew, the second and third levels of those offices were nearly all Jewish. Throughout much of the 1920s and 30s, there were constant massacres of people, as you can see from the list scrolling on the screen. The events early on were designed to gain political power by eliminating opposition. Uprisings during these periods were met with fierce hostility and death, but the largest death tolls were from multiple structured famines in certain regions. Even scholars debate on whether those famines were really genocides. Easily over 10 million people had died during this time, and that doesn't even count the number of people that died in the gulags, which about another 10 million people went to the gulags during this time. And if you don't know what a gulag is, it is basically a concentration camp, but harsher. Who was the main victim during this period? White Russian Christians. It was unknown to much of the world at the time the extent of what was going on, but knew of constant discontent. If you want to know more about the gulags and who controlled the Soviet Union during this time, you should look up this man, Alexander Solzhenitsyn. This is just a little of what he said. You must understand, the leading Bolsheviks who took over Russia were not Russians. They hated Russians. They hated Christians. Driven by ethnic hatred, they tortured and slaughtered millions of Russians without a shred of human remorse. It cannot be overstated. Bolshevism committed the greatest manslaughter of all time. The fact that most of the world is ignorant and uncaring about this enormous crime is proof that the global media is in the hands of the perpetrators. It was clear to the whole world in the 1920s and 30s who had taken over and was leading the Soviet Union, that even Hitler, when talking about the Soviet Union, would reference them as Bolshevik Jews or Communist Jews. One of the worst massacres happened just before World War II, during 1936 and 1938, called the Great Purge, which was carried out by the NKVD. The NKVD was the secret police in the Soviet Union, but more brutal than the German SS. During the Great Purge, most of the Russian Orthodox clerics were killed off. Majority of the leaders in politics and military killed off, and various other perceived enemies of the state. In total, about 1 million are killed. The military leadership lost during the Great Purge is one that will have an impact on the coming war.